My name is Tommaso Dalla Vecchia. I'll be the master of ceremony for today's event. If you attended some other of our event, you saw me a few times already. They always volunteer me for some reasons, so if you could next time in your feedback form rate me very badly, so next time I can be quiet with you among the audience, that would be appreciated. I'm very glad to see you all and welcome you here in Brussels with such a lovely weather. We have a very ambitious program among us before us, and we're looking forward to get started. We managed to gather also, yet again, about 150 participants representing 30 plus countries across Europe and beyond, very different organizations from teacher training institutes, from our Future Classroom Lab and STEM Alliance partners, ministries of education representatives, European commissions and European Parliament representatives. So we're really eager to get started and discuss with you the important topic that we decided to focus this edition of the forum. The forum, as always, is organized by European Schoolnet, but this year we had the pleasure to co-host and co-organize this event with two wonderful consortia, managing as many Erasmus Plus teacher academies, the Continue Up and the 21st Century European Teacher Projects, which you will learn more about during these 2 days. So we're very grateful for the support and the contribution of the partners with whom you will engage also during these 2 days. We, as a housekeeping reminder, please consider that the conference Wi-Fi code is meetings with a final S, in case you didn't manage to connect until now. And the rest, you know, I can look at you, I can see very experienced attendees to conferences and events. The important part is really to openly discuss and exchange and network and connect among ourselves during these days and sessions. And I'm really looking forward to do the same together with you. The topic that we focused on is empowering future-ready educators. And before getting started, since this is the event that really looks into practice and what happens into classrooms, schools, training centers, and actual actors that work daily on supporting teachers and students, I would like us to make the effort to picture ourselves and put ourselves in the shoes of a teacher, which is now today in their classroom, doesn't have the chance to network and be in a conference with many like-minded people like we have. And they're probably asking themselves one or two questions. How do I engage my students more? How do I use technology better for doing so? And not just more, how do I make my teaching really more meaningful and effective in my daily practice? Perhaps they also ask themselves, how do I get through today? How do I get through this week? How do I survive this little lovely cohort of savages I will meet soon in my classroom? And probably they are asking themselves both questions. And that's why we're here, to think with a forward-looking approach, but also with a very practical mindset, trying to come up with solutions to make this environment, the system for educators and teachers across Europe, more supportive, effective, and perhaps present ready, and not just future ready. So without further ado, I would like to introduce on stage our Executive Director, Marc Durando, to open officially the conference, and I would ask you to warmly welcome him on stage.
Thank you, Tommaso. Dear Ministries of Education, member of European Schoolnet, dear teacher educators, dear industry partners, dear European Commission colleagues, and dear participants. This year we are delighted to organize a School Innovation Forum here in Brussels. And it's really a privilege to open this event on one of the most pressing challenges and greatest opportunities of our time, the importance of teachers in the transformation of our education systems, more particularly supporting the digital transformation of education, but also preparing teachers for complexity in general, fostering inclusion, sustainability and the green transition, and building a lifelong learning mindset. It's a timely event, as Tommaso mentioned, as it coincides with the achievements of 2 Erasmus Plus Teacher Academy projects, the Continua project and the 21st Century European Teachers project, on which we will share the principal outcomes during this event. Much has been said about technology. We speak on artificial intelligence, data, platforms, and innovation at scale. We invest in infrastructure, we debate regulation, we anticipate disruption, but in doing so, we must be clear about one fundamental truth. Technology does not transform education, but teachers do. Teachers are not simply users of technology, they are its interpreters, its guides, its conscience. They are the ones who turn tools into learning, data into insight, and access into opportunities. Without them, digital transformation risks becoming only a technical exercise rather than a human improvement. At the heart of education lies a profoundly human relationship, the connection between a teacher and a learner. It is built on trust, empathy, and the ability to inspire. And no algorithm can replicate that. But when thoughtfully integrated, the digital tools can amplify it, extending the reach of great teaching, personalizing learning pathways. And that is why the role of teachers in the digital age must not be diminished, but elevated. Nowadays, the role of teachers is evolving substantially. We expect teachers to be change drivers at the heart of change, innovators and researchers, orchestrators of the learning process, and in and outside the school environment, data analyst experts, not teaching in isolation, but sharing practice and being part of communities. And more importantly, being inspiring. Teachers are widely seen as central to successful digital transformation, but the reality on the ground is that they face a set of very concrete and often structural challenges. These go well beyond simply learning new tools. First, time and work pressure. The biggest constraint is not willingness, it is time. Teachers are expected to redesign lessons for digital environments, learn new platforms, assess students in new ways, all on top of already heavy workloads. Without dedicated time, digital innovation becomes an additional burden rather than an improvement. 2, professional development. Training is often too technical and concentrated on how tools work, and rather than pedagogical, working on how they improve learning. They are disconnected from the classroom realities. Teachers need sustained, practice-based support, not just workshops, but coaching, peer learning, and experimentation. 3, rapid technological change. The pace of innovation, especially with AI, creates uncertainty. Which tools are worth investing time in? What will still be relevant next year? How to deal with tools that students already use informally? This can lead to some sort of fatigue and skepticism from the teachers. 4, lack of pedagogical clarity. Technology is often introduced without a clear vision of what better learning looks like, how digital tools improve outcomes, and this leaves teachers to figure it out themselves, creating inconsistency and from time to time frustration. 5, data and AI challenges. With the rise of AI and learning analytics, teachers face new questions. How to interpret data meaningfully, how to ensure ethical use of student data, how to adapt assessment when AI can generate answers. This is not just a technical issue, it's a professional and ethical one. 6, equity in classroom. Digital transformation can widen gaps such as unequal access to devices or connectivity, differences in digital skills among students, varying level of parental support, and teachers are often expected to be the ones compensating these inequalities in the class. 7, loss of professional autonomy. Some digital systems prescribe teaching methods, standardize content, increase monitoring, and this can create a sense that teachers are being managed by technology rather than empowered by it. 8, infrastructure and reliability issues. Even in well-resourced systems, teachers still face unstable platforms. I will not give any example today in this room. Lack of technical support, fragmented systems of tools. Nothing undermines confidence faster than tools that don't work in real classroom conditions. 9, changing role and identity. As already mentioned, teachers are asked to shift from knowledge transmitters to facilitators, mentors, designers of learning. This is a profound professional transformation which requires recognition, support, and time to adapt. 10, trust and inclusion in decision-making. Too often, teachers are the last to be consulted and the first expected to implement. When they are not involved in shaping digital strategies, adoption is weaker and resistance grows. The challenge is not that teachers resist to change. It's that systems often underestimate what meaningful changes require. If digital transformation is to succeed, the focus must shift from equipping teachers with tools to creating the conditions in which teachers can thrive with technology. I will finish my presentation by focusing more on an important element of the teaching continuum, and more particularly, in order to address all the challenges I just described previously, we need to start already at the initial teacher education stage, when preparing future teachers to enter the profession. Too many initiatives are focusing on professional development of in-service teachers, without taking into account the imperative necessity to also reflect on the role of initial teacher education in addressing the challenges brought by the digital transformation. And often, ITE programs and continuing professional development exist as separate responsibilities, designed by different institutions, guided by different frameworks, and disconnected one another. A new qualified teacher may leave the university having barely reflected of the digital realities that they will face in the classroom, and the professional development offered later may be a little relation to what they learned during their studies. We absolutely need to bridge this gap. We have to promote a culture of genuine collaboration between different actors involved in the continuum of teacher education, and started to building the first foundation for this specific activity. This means universities, schools, and training providers working together, not in parallel, but in partnership. It means student teachers learning alongside experienced practitioners, and experienced teachers reconnecting with the research and innovation happening in universities. It is precisely this kind of collaboration that the projects behind our event have begun to make a reality. And it is this continuum that we must now commit to embedding in our national and institutional strategies. If we want to empower teachers to be the change makers of our education systems, we must move beyond the notion that teachers need to adapt to technology. Instead, we must design teacher education systems where initial preparation and ongoing development reinforce one another, forming a coherent foundation that supports professional judgment, nurtures expertise, and equips teachers to use technology purposefully so they are free to focus on what matters most, engaging and empowering every learner. Our conference today will deal with all these topics. We organize this event around keynote speeches as well as roundtables with the participation of teacher education professionals, representative of the Commission as well as our ministries of education, industry partners and experts. This forum is an opportunity to encourage a discussion on this crucial topic, foster synergies and support learning among participants, facilitating dialogue among teachers, educators, teachers, schools, researchers and policymakers, and sharing evidence, policy initiatives and successful practice in schools. The transformation of the role of teachers to support this digital transformation of our education systems requires a political commitment. A commitment to invest not only in devices and connectivity, but in professional development, collaboration, and trust. A commitment to involve teachers in the design of digital strategies, not as an afterthought, but as co-creators. And a commitment to ensure the digital transformation strengthens equity rather than deepening existing divides. Ultimately, the question is not what technology can do. It is what education should achieve. If we empower teachers, digital transformation can become a force for inclusion, creativity, and lifelong learning. If we overlook them, it risks becoming yet another reform that promises much and delivers little. Let us place teachers at the center of this transformation, not at its margin, but at its heart. I wish you all 2 very successful days in Brussels. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you for your thoughtful word, Marc. Now we are very pleased and thankful to have also with us Stefaan Hermans, Director of Policy Strategy and Evaluation at European Commission's Directorate-General for Education, Youth, Sport and Culture. So thank you, Mr. Hermans, for being with us, and please welcome him on stage warmly.
Well, good morning. We're still on the welcome session, right? And if it's okay with you, I want to go off script as a starter, okay? Because you're all insiders, right? You know what the European Union is doing. You certainly have heard about things like the European education area. You must be familiar with the Union of Skills. You know that we love to talk about governance, and you probably would appreciate if sometimes there might be a bit more of the governing in the governance, but that's what I want to come to in a second immediately. Because you do know that one of the initiatives that have been set up by the European Commission is that it will establish a board, a high-level board, looking at skills and how do we actually manage to deal with skills gaps, how do we address future skills, and all of those issues as well. Now, purely by coincidence, earlier this week, when we were talking to the chair of that board, Ylva Johansson is the name, and she was actually reminding us that she was at the very origin of European Schoolnet. When Sweden joined the European Union, that she actually said, because she was Minister of Education at that time, she said, why is there not close contact between the different ministries, between the different partners in education? Why don't we think as a community, as a European classroom, she said. So she will now be the one who actually will be thinking about the future of education, the future of skills in particular, and the development on that. So she will be chairing it, and amongst the members in the board, we'll also make sure that there are representatives of the teaching profession as well to contribute to that. I know it was off script. I'm sure that was not intended or expected from your side, but it's a little anecdote that I want to share, because I think it's also a message that I want to give when we talk about in the European Commission and we talk at the level of the European Union on education, on skills development, that we're also very much zoomed in on the key role that the teacher has, not just in what we discuss within the department I'm working in, but also throughout the other activities and the other departments of the Commission, as well as in the interaction with the entire stakeholder community on that. So, That takes me to the teaching profession, right? And the future of it. You heard a lot from Marc already. And yes, I do want to echo, indeed, that if it wasn't for the teachers, we could not have any quality education within Europe. If we talk about basic skills, if we talk about integrating technology for education purpose, for improving learning outcome, if we talk about dealing with the diversity, I mean, all of that, the key role is there when it comes to teachers. And more than just talking about curriculum, infrastructure, financing, none of that has any meaning if we do not have good teachers in the classroom. Because they are the ones who also shape the lives of young children, the life of young adults. And that's what brings us together here to actually discuss teaching, the teaching profession, and how we actually move forward on that. Now, I want to start on this one also with a positive component and a positive element. And we are always whispered that we have to be careful when we say this, but the fact remains that one of the elements that comes out of the TALIS data, so work that has been done by the OECD, is that generally teachers are very pleased to be a teacher. Teachers like to teach. 90% of them, 90% of them, do report the satisfaction with their profession. But then, when you think about the data that also come up in the same data set, is that only 15% of the teachers feel that they are valued by society. They love to teach, but they don't find the appreciation for the work that they are doing. Neither do they feel that they are sufficiently well supported for doing the job that they have chosen in life. And that indeed, I think Marc was speaking about this as well, when it comes to use of time, that maybe far too much time is being spent on other things than what they actually would love to do and what's their passion and their profession. And we do see this. We know about the recruitment issues that we have in education, the retention issues. Obviously, we are not helped by the demographic change that we are undergoing within the European Union, but it remains a fact that this kind of appreciation does have an impact on how people feel about their profession and what they would like to continue to do. When you feel isolated, when you feel you're not sufficiently well supported, that you work a lot and maybe you don't get the outcome that you're looking for, it is not exactly an encouraging message. And think about all those issues that we expect increasingly from teachers. How do you deal with all the different types of learning needs that you may find yourself confronted with in the classroom? How do you deal with this digital transformation? Everybody is staring at you as you have to be the master of it, but you're not prepared for it. And nobody has actually even thought that it is about pedagogics and that is actually the goal and improving the learning outcome. How do you deal with the multilingual environment in which you operate? And then also with all the socio-emotional and all kind of other issues that one society expects teachers to be addressing. Yes, that's where we are. And then clearly on the teacher subject and shortages, here as well when it comes to areas where also within the EU, within business, within industry, we say we need more people in STEM, but it's difficult to prepare people for STEM field if you don't even find teachers to start teaching STEM at an early age. It's not something you catch up on later in life. It's something that has to start early. And certainly also, depending where you live, that also will be very much impacted on the educational environment and the teachers that you may encounter in your life and take the benefit of for your further development. The issue, of course, here is this is not isolated. It's not an isolated concern. It's not anecdotal. The issue is that these are systemic features, that we have systemic risks. And obviously, that is where it becomes essential, also from a policy-making perspective, to see what can be done on this. And these are matters that, at the level of the European Union, also for us within the European Commission, that we do take seriously with the means, with the resources, with the tools that we have. Having exchanges, cooperation, interact with one another. going into evidence, understanding the situation, and clearly also try to take joint action and take advantage of people like you here in the room and the dialogue that will be taking place, the practice that comes out of that we actually can also help to translate this into measures, into action. I want to address a couple of domains where we as the European Commission are fully engaged in this debate. And I would like to start with one that I hope doesn't sound too much like jargon, but which is really important to raise it here, and that's within the European semester. Okay? So the European semester is that domain within the European Union where there is a socio-economic coordination that takes place. So all sorts of policy, whether it's labor market, whether it's social, whether it's research, whether it's justice systems, and also education is a feature of that. And that is, what are the strengths and the weaknesses in the country? What are the strengths and the weaknesses that we have within the European Union? How do we maximize the strengths? And how do we actually get rid of the weaknesses and manage to overcome them? That's the essence of that European semester. It is also the one that comes closest to being Chefsache in the European Union as well. So it is not a small detail. It is actually a quite important area in which we are operating. So for that, we had, at the end of last year and adopted in March this year, for the very first time, an EU27 recommendation on human capital. And on human capital, please understand this here as clearly an education component, but also a skills component in terms of reskilling and upskilling. And particularly important is obviously the relationship between those two. How do you have this transition between those two? So within that, and that also has been agreed at ministerial level, there's a very strong dimension emphasizing the role of the teacher in this transformation that we are going through as our economies and our society. Support for teachers when it comes to the digital embracement, but also the issues around recruitment, about careers, is clearly an element that features very prominently within the EU27 recommendation, so addressed to all the member states collectively. Now, this follows through on work that we have had over the past years already, so it's less of a novelty, but much more of a continuity over time, is that we also have, within that European semester, country-specific recommendations. So that is where the Commission makes a proposal to the Council of Ministers to address a recommendation to a member state, so every member state separately, so 27 member states, as to what are main elements to address in order to actually improve their economic system, their societal system, so the socio-economic transition that we are looking for. On those, in those country-specific recommendations, last year, so in 2025, there were 12 EU member states that have received country-specific recommendations that were focused on teachers. Shortages, and dealing with shortages being one, but also for improving career paths and working conditions, but also for strengthening not only the continuous teacher education, but also the initial, as Marc was also referring to in his speech. So this is within the overarching approach. So when you think about the European Union, when you think about how we look into the future and changes that can be made, it's clear that the role of education has a key role within that, and particularly also when it comes to the teaching profession. But policy is one thing. There is also program, as you know. Erasmus Plus program is one of those. What we also try to do as much as we can is to have a relationship between the policies and the program, so the policy and the financing and the funding that comes with it. And that's particularly what we see here with the teacher academies. I'm sure we'll hear interesting experiences from those who have been working on that before that we will hear today. I also want to say something when it comes to this into the future, because obviously some of you will be worried, will there continue to be money when it comes to improving teaching profession? Yes, it is foreseen in the Erasmus Plus program that also in the period 2028 and beyond, that we will continue to finance teacher academies where we can bring the expertise together, but also the expectations that are there and the demands from teachers, but also what can be offered that we can actually match this. So as to the future as well, as a last thing that I would like to say here, and I know that there are, or there will be, some of colleagues of mine of DG EAC who will be around, who will be very eager to pick your brain and hear what you have to say, because they're also working on a teacher agenda as part of the education package, which the Commission has scheduled to be adopted before the end of the year. And that clearly does reflect that you can't talk about quality education if you do not devote the specific attention that the teaching profession needs on that. And that's also an area we're working on. I can't tell you much more on this. At this moment in time, it would be far too early because the conversations is ongoing, but I think you have heard already enough pointers that have to be considered for this. And last but not least, an element that I would like to share with you as well is it is incredibly difficult to really find comparative information on teaching and the teaching profession within the European Union. But it is not because it's difficult that one should not try. It is not because it is difficult that one cannot make progress on that. So we have been developing within the Commission what is called the Teachers Dashboard, which is now part of what you can find also on our website when you go and look at the Education and Training Monitor. We will be updating the information on it. So what we really have been trying to do, not just on data that we have from the OECD or from UNESCO or from also from Eurostat, but we're also looking at national data in particular as well, in order to actually give, as well as possible, a picture of the teaching profession, including with the strengths and the weaknesses to look into. So with this, I wish you a very successful day and a half, good conversations, I hope also very inspirational, and that a lot of the practice and the good practice and practice that leads to a good learning outcome, that we actually manage to do more of that, that we find inspiration of that, and that we can reflect it also within our future work that we can have, whether it's policy-wise or program-wise and project-wise. Thank you very much. I wish you a good day and a half here.
And thank you very much for this very encouraging yet challenging address. We're very pleased also to have a representative from UNESCO with us today for the first keynote speech. Carlos Vargas is the Chief of Section for Teacher Development at UNESCO and is also head of the Secretariat of the International Task Force on Teachers for Education 2030. So please welcome him on stage very warmly for his keynote speech on What Vision for Teachers' Education.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for the invitation, of course, to this very important and, as has been said before, very timely conference as we look forward to the changes that we are seeing in the region, in the continent, and beyond that teachers are actually facing. And I think these moments of reflection and these moments of collaboration and collective thinking is where we might find the answers to the changes and the transformations that we might want to see in the teaching profession. So with that in mind, I prepared a presentation which will very briefly present a vision for the transformation of teacher education and professional development. Now, this vision is based on some of the, I would say, seminal work that UNESCO has done throughout the decades, for about 8 decades now, on thinking about the purpose of education, think about how the organization of education and learning is actually following that purpose or defeating that purpose. So I would just like to invite you to be critical as we look at what the vision for the transformation of the teaching profession is when we have in mind the kind of education that we want. So that's the invitation today to look at. So in my presentation, which I have entitled Recasting Teaching as a Collaborative Profession, and the implications that this has for teacher education and professional development, I will touch upon three things. One of them is why collaborate? The second will be the modalities for collaboration, and the third would be what are some of the enabling conditions and the international commitments that we can collaborate upon in order to transform teacher education and professional development. So the first answer as to why to collaborate is the size of the challenge. It was mentioned already at the opening ceremony. Globally, we do have a shortage of 44 million teachers. This is only if we want to ensure universal primary and secondary education worldwide. If we include early childhood education, 1 year of pre-primary, that goes to 50 million teachers. So we do have a shortage of quantity. You have in the screen the global report on teachers that we published in 2024, which actually unveiled, first, that the world lacks 44 million teachers, but then we looked into why the world lacks 44 million teachers. And we ran into basically two important determinants. One of them is demographics, and in some parts of the world, sub-Saharan Africa, Southeast Asia, we do see demographic growth, which means there's more children, therefore you need more schools, therefore you need more teachers. It's a pretty easy equation for education planners. However, what the report showed is that of these 44 million teachers, about 58% of this shortage was not due to demographic change, but it was due to teacher attrition. Basically the fact that teachers are leaving the profession and they're not coming back. They're leaving usually within the first 5 years of service, and the bulk of the shortage is actually due to attrition. Now, when one looks into the reasons why teachers leave the profession, there's a variety of causes. But one that it ends up boiling down to is actually the working conditions of teachers, which we shouldn't forget are the learning conditions of students. So the working conditions has one side, which is material, basically salaries, infrastructure, resources, workloads, etc. But we know that in those places where teachers are well paid, they continue to leave the profession. We do have indicators in different countries where this happens. So it's not only about the material conditions, but also about the symbolic conditions of teaching. Basically the respect, the social appreciation, the autonomy that teachers are actually granted, as it has been said before, as knowledge producers, as policy partners. So that is an important point that I want you to bear in mind, because this has to do with how we construe the profession. The director from DG IAC was making reference to the multiple roles that teachers have today. And if we look at our teacher education systems, do we have the development, the practice of those competencies that actually make those transformations and fulfill those roles? So we do have a shortage of quantity, but we also have a shortage of quality in terms of the quality of teaching. On the one hand, we have around 85% of teachers who are qualified. Basically, they have a qualification to teach, which means we still have about 15% of teachers who don't. But even within those that do, once again, we need to be critical when we examine initial teacher education. And what is in a qualification? First of all, the quality of initial teacher education is something to look at. But secondly, the gap that exists between what one learns in initial teacher education and the realities of the classroom as one steps into the school, which tend to be very different. So basically, one tries to do a job that was not prepared for. So that is the challenge in terms of the gap between initial teacher education and teaching practice. It has been said before, teachers need robust education and training. They need, and I will come back to this, and we need to think of teacher professional development as a lifelong endeavor. basically that it is lifelong throughout the professional career of teachers, that it is life-wide, that looks into beyond the skills and beyond the cognitive, more into the social, the emotional, the cultural dimensions of learning. So why collaborate? I would say also because of a vision that we have of teachers and teaching within the vision that we have for education. So here I would like to share with you, you're probably familiar with this publication that came out of the deliberations of the International Commission on the Futures of Education, which was organized by UNESCO, and which came out in 2021, right before the COVID. It was not the best time for a publication to come out. Nonetheless, the publication has very powerful thinking because it was the result of a very, very large consultative process across the world, and the reflections through almost 2 years of a commission of experts representing different corners of education, from government to practice to unions to etc., on the future. So I invite you to look at chapter 5, which basically calls to recast teaching as a collaborative profession. Now, that has implications for policy and for practice. On the one hand, why or how do we collaborate? Who are the stakeholders that collaborate in transforming education or in improving teacher practice? In what spaces do teachers collaborate, or where is their expertise solicited as we make educational decisions at the system level, at the normative level, etc. So it has implications for policy. Basically, who crafts policy? When we do a curricular reform, what are teachers in the exercise? Is it something that happens in an expert room in the Ministry of Education or a firm? Or does it happen with teachers, drawing from their expertise and the knowledge that we want them to deploy in classrooms? So it does have implications for policy. What I will focus now is on the implications for teacher education and professional development. So from the collaborative ways of working, to the collective thinking, to the learning together, to the communities of practice, as something that can shape education. Just for you to know, World Teachers' Day, which is something we celebrate at UNESCO globally on the 5th of October, which is the anniversary of the recommendation concerning the status of teachers, which was signed in 1966. So it's going to be 60 years in October. And as a good birthday present, we're going to revise that recommendation because the world of 66 is very different from the world that we see today. Nonetheless, the importance of teachers, I would say, is bigger than it was in 1966 in view of many changes that we're seeing in the world today, from identity politics to violence to discrimination, racism, to artificial intelligence, technologies, and a complete different landscape of what it means to be a teacher today. So there you have a QR code also for a paper that we published on the occasion, which is Recasting Teaching as a Collaborative Profession. It does show, and I'll share with you, what are some also of the reasons for the change and the transformation of teaching as a collaborative profession. So it has to do with how we conceive of teacher knowledge, teacher judgment, and teacher practice as an important way of collaboration. We do believe, of course, that education is relational, not transactional. It is in the interaction between humans that we learn to be, that we learn to learn, and that we learn to become. So it is very important, and I think this is something that will be touched upon later when talking about artificial intelligence, the role that teachers have in building communities, in building social cohesion, in bringing the well-being as part, I would say, as a prerequisite for the skills and the professional competences, but actually the well-being and the happiness of students. So first of all, as we said, teachers are in the classrooms on an everyday basis. They are the ones who are more familiar with what works and what doesn't in education. They produce knowledge that they use and that hopefully they share with others to improve practice. Nonetheless, teachers don't usually participate in educational decision-making. And this goes back to the question of teacher appreciation and to what extent do we believe of teachers, as we did before, as public intellectuals, as pillars of communities, as partners in policy. Is that a place where teachers are invited to now, or is it not? And if it's not, why? And why do we think the profession accordingly? So we want to underline the fact that teachers do produce knowledge, that knowledge that they produce can be useful for themselves, for others, for school governance and management, for policy change, for curricular development, etc. And this is something that we have witnessed happens mostly in collaboration. It is when teachers work together that this knowledge is produced. We're far past the times when individual, eureka insights were held for knowledge production. It's always through collaboration, yet often teachers work in isolation, disconnected from peers, mentors, school leaders, the community, etc. So Tallis is something that was quoted. You'll see as well that the opportunities for collaboration of teachers are rather limited in Europe and beyond. But we know that collaboration is key. So what I will show to you are some examples and some modalities of how professional learning communities happen, mentoring, induction, supportive leadership, and other practices are reshaping the profession. That's just an example of different parts of data. We know that in pearls, around 75% of teachers rate collaboration as very, very high. That's a very important feature of the profession. Many of them, almost all of them, see CPD as something that is important. However, only 40% of secondary teachers in OECD countries receive induction. And just 22% of novices are assigned mentors. So there are ways of thinking of professional development which is individual, which is disparate, which is in isolation, and there might be opportunities for self-paced learning, top-down courses, mandatory, sometimes on school holidays. But there's very little space for collaboration. Moreover, while 90% of teachers in OECD countries noted that they had attended at least one professional development activity in the last year, half of them only have engaged in peer learning or in networking. So there's that space for moderating, for maturing the thoughts, for sharing and exchanging are the ones that we might be lacking. Then continuous professional development doesn't happen in every country in the same way. We do have there the percentage of countries where CPD is compulsory by policy or by normative instruments for primary school teachers by income group. So you'll see in high-income countries, about 73% of them have a policy for CPD, but then as resources fall, we see in low-income countries only 14% of the countries, of most of the countries in the world, that actually do have frameworks or an obligation to provide continuous professional development. That's something we need to think, as we also think of education as a right for learners, also for teachers. I think there should be a right to continuous professional development, one that is teacher-led, that is centered on the needs, etc. Now, what are some of the modalities of collaboration, what are some examples of good practice that we have seen across the world? So first, on the modalities, we have on the one hand where collaboration happens, I would say the spaces for collaboration, and we have the phases of collaboration, when collaboration happens. And I will try to illustrate very rapidly through a few examples. I'm sure you will have many more, and I hope to learn from the examples that you will be presenting today and tomorrow, as we're putting together our second global report, which will focus precisely on transforming teacher professional development. So let me get started. So in terms of the spaces where collaboration happens between teachers and students, this is just one example. It's about STEM projects in Chinese high schools. And we see, for example, methodologies that you all know, like project-based learning, where students collaborate with industry, where teachers are placed as mentors. I will not abound on the process on this particular project, but maybe just to say that there are certain methodologies that have fallen out of use or that have been a stereotype for certain kinds of training. In this case, for example, vocational education or STEM education. So everything that has to do with project-based learning, learning by doing, apprenticeships, learning from others, which has an intergenerational dimension to it as well, is something that is at the base of the success of many of these programs. Or we could talk about the collaboration between teachers themselves. You're probably familiar with this publication. It is the United Nations Secretary-General's high-level panel on the teaching profession, which came after the Transforming Education Summit and the commitment of 194 member states of the United Nations to transform and improve the teaching profession. And in the recommendations, teacher collaboration was also mentioned. In the case of collaboration between teachers themselves, we have there a study of a Qatari preparatory school or a network of schools that where professional learning communities improve teacher collaboration. So, I mean, I think it is an obvious fact. What is not obvious is, it was mentioned this morning as well, the time and the space that is needed for collaboration. Professional learning communities do not happen in the hallways or in the bathroom or in the break. They need dedicated space, they need dedicated time so that teachers can actually share, come together, collaborate, etc. So there's an example of where the conditions were put in place for this collaboration to take place. Now, the collaboration between teachers and school leaders is also something that's very important. An example that is actually cited in our global report has to do with the Hertz, which is a study that UNESCO has been conducting for over 25 years in Latin America and the Caribbean. And it's, if you may, a small PISA for the region. 19 countries in Latin America. It's a test that looks at the skills in reading, arithmetics, socio-emotional learning, and others. Now, what this report shows, and my colleagues in the office in Santiago, who leads in Chile, who leads this report, they have made what they call an associated factors analysis. Basically, they look at the results of the tests. So you have countries that rank better than others in certain subjects. You have areas within countries that do better than others. But what they wanted to know is why. So they look at these associated factors. Many of them have to do with resources, with school infrastructure, with this and that. But there's one study on teachers as one of the factors making the change. What this study found, which I find really, really interesting, is that in those schools that were led by principals who invited teachers to collaborate on the decisions of the school, one would imagine there's better school climate, of course. there's better teacher well-being, for sure. But ultimately, there's better learning outcomes. And not only that, but there's actually the installation of a mentality of collaboration across the board. This thing that you know better than me, that's called hidden curriculum, and one cannot learn to collaborate in a non-collaborative environment. So it is very important to consider the spaces where we work and how these relationships that are horizontal, that are collaborative and not competitive, can shape the profession in a better way. And then the collaboration between teachers and community members themselves. This is an example from the US. It's called the School Community Partnerships, or SWIFT. And this is where teachers go outside, I would say, beyond the boundaries of a school, and they actually engage with parents, they engage with the community, and this is where education begins to make sense for many of the learners and for many of the parents and the communities, actually, where education is contextualized and responds to the very needs of the community. Not only that, but that since a school is embedded in a community, the decisions around the school are actually made collectively as well. So of course, the buy-in, the collaboration, the contribution of the community to the school is something that comes without saying. I think I probably overdid the examples, but very quickly, that was the spaces. Now, the phases of collaboration. So one of them we have is, of course, initial teacher education. That's a very important, it's been mentioned this morning as well. You all, of course, know about the importance of initial teacher education. But I would like to talk about what students learn and how they do it at ITE, but then what are the experiences of exposure into practice. So, of course, the issue of the practicum, the issue of the onboarding into schools is something very important. So once graduates leave initial teacher education and they begin their professional life, that welcoming, that onboarding, that induction into the profession is key. First, to know that you're not alone against a classroom or their parents or the community, but it's actually you're welcome into a community of professionals that actually share, like any professional community, they share a body of knowledge, they share a repertoire of practice, they share a code of conduct, a code of service, a code of ethics around the changes that we want to see in society together. So that itself is very important, especially when we see that the biggest shortage of teachers has to do with teacher attrition. So the welcoming, the onboarding, and that happens, teacher attrition happens within the first 5 years. So that induction, that mentoring, that human contact and welcoming to a community is something very important in the process. Another example from Norway on collective peer teaching that happens in teacher education with students across different levels. Examples in Korea, in the Dominican Republic, in Chile around mentoring. Chile is an interesting example because they actually established it in a teacher career law. So there's a law now that actually mandates that induction, onboarding, and mentoring is something that happens on a regular basis. Then Korea also has a policy, an induction program from the Dominican Republic, etc. Then comes continuous professional development, also as a way of professional learning. So once again, if you look at the example, these are led by teachers themselves. It's not a firm, it's not an institute, it's not a university that comes and tells you what to do, but it's actually the teachers themselves that can actually observe each other's practice, that can actually engage in co-teaching. So the issue around observation, systematization, dialogue around what works and what doesn't is where I was making reference to the reflective dimension of teaching that makes teaching visible and creates feedback-rich environment. So this is also something that one learns in practice, to provide feedback, to welcome feedback, to change practice according to it, etc. Another example, Japanese lesson study that you probably all know, as a professional development tool that has been widespread implemented in South Africa. This comes from co-planning of a research lesson through collaborative lesson planning. There was a mention this morning about how can artificial intelligence amplify instead of undermine teacher agency and teacher judgment. In this collaboration and co-creation of lesson plans is something that we've seen promise. Let me move a bit faster because I know I've taken some time. This is the last part of my presentation, and it has to share with you what are some of the global initiatives and international commitments to make teaching more collaborative. And that has to do, as we said before, with collaborations between teachers, teachers and students, teachers and communities, teachers and school leaders, but very, very importantly, teachers and policymakers, and between policymakers themselves. So, as I mentioned before, World Teachers' Day was dedicated to it. There's a link that you will be able to see for the paper. I will not abound, but just to say that celebrating that collaboration plays a very important role in the transformation. Also, that elevating the status of the teaching profession is something that works, not only discursively, saying we love teachers, we think of them, etc., but actually showing and demonstrating that that status is elevated. How? When the trust, when the confidence, and the appreciation translates into policies that support the teaching profession. The global report, you're probably familiar with this one. I will not speak much more about it, but just to say, in addition to the issue of shortages, attrition, examples of how countries have addressed teacher shortages, we found promising ways of collaboration, particularly with teacher unions and frameworks of social dialogue in which this collaboration, again, is at the heart of educational change. International cooperation, not to say, is something very, very important. And then you might be familiar with the Santiago Consensus. This was very recently. There was a World Summit on Teachers, which was organized by UNESCO and the government of Chile in Santiago last summer. Actually, it was winter in Santiago, it was pretty cold, in August 2025, and where, coming from the Global Report on Teachers, the United Nations High-Level Panel on the Teaching Profession, the recommendation of TESS, the Fortaleza Declaration, the Sevilla Commitments on Financing, etc., etc. Basically, a lot of international summits where commitments were made to improve education, teaching, and the teaching profession came together to renew that particular commitment, and this was the result. I invite you to visit the Santiago Consensus. There's a specific language and agreements around making teaching as a collaborative profession. You're probably familiar with these two. There are two normative instruments at global level, the only two that are global that UNESCO safeguards, the 1966 recommendation concerning the status of teachers and the 1997 recommendation concerning the status of higher education teaching personnel. As I said before, we have engaged in a revision of these recommendations. This is something that we have started in 2026 and will run all the way to 2027. So we have 2 years to revise this, I would say, forward-looking instruments. If you look at them, even though it dates from 1966, they were very visionary in terms of the rights, the responsibilities, the challenges that teachers face, and therefore the policies that need to be provided. Just to say, within these normative instruments, the issue of teacher education and professional development will be addressed as well, and the collaborative nature of it is something that we want to put in focus. Final slide. We have a global report coming up in 2026, which will be presented in November at the Teacher Policy Dialogue Forum of the TTF, the International Task Force on Teachers for Education 2030, which we host at UNESCO, and which looks at transforming TPD from a lifelong learning perspective. So on the one hand, we want to see TPD as lifelong. That means from the cradle to the grave, through the professional career, etc. Life-wide has to do with the different spaces where teacher professional development can happen beyond teacher education institutions. We know that learning happens in multiple spaces, and intersectoral policy can actually open up other spaces for learning, like museums, libraries, community centers, and others, that actually help address the multiple purposes of education. As we see initial teacher education today, CPD frameworks, teaching standards, many of them are really focused around covering the curriculum. They're very focused around developing the skills of learners, but we do know that qualification is but one of the purposes of education. I would say another is socialization and identity formation and learning to live together and non-discrimination, etc., etc., etc. So these multiple purposes of education is very difficult to embed in the curriculum, especially in a curriculum that's already heavy enough, where teachers have less time and less hours of teaching that items in the curriculum to cover. So it's always tricky to embed these changes in the curriculum, but this can certainly be embedded within the practice of teachers. Again, collaboration, emulating, promoting collaboration, co-construction of knowledge in the classroom is a way to do it. And finally, teacher professional development that is life deep, that is life entangled within the community where teachers are part of shaping those communities, and where we look at the social, the cultural, and the political dimension of teaching as well. It is very important that we reconsider, we revisit the status of teachers, that we put them at center space of the transformations in society today, and that, I believe, begins with teacher education. So, few questions for our thinking about how this contributes, teacher collaboration might contribute to genuine transformations of education systems. What needs to be done to ensure collaboration is sustained throughout teachers' professional development? And how can we build on this global momentum to support a collective shift towards teaching as a collaborative profession? I look forward to those answers and to the conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you for giving us a vision, a long-standing and looking forward vision, but also very concrete examples and challenges and means to address those challenges. I'm sure in the next panel discussion that will be also addressed. And without further ado, I would like to start welcoming on the stage Benjamin Hertz, which is a Senior Pedagogical Manager at European Schoolnet, but also Jonna Kangas from the University of Helsinki, Kay Livingston from the University of Glasgow, Roberta Piazza from the University of Catania, and Silvia Panzavolta from the Italian Institute for Documentation, Innovation and Educational Research for the next panel discussion that will be introduced by Ben. And thank you for welcoming them on stage very warmly as well, and have a fruitful conversation.
Great, thank you. Hello? Working? Is it working? Yeah?
Yes.
Okay. Well, thank you, Tommaso, and special thanks also to Carlos Vargas for that inspiring keynote. I think you've picked up on a lot of the issues that we hopefully will continue talking about here in this panel. I think you've made a really compelling case for recasting the teaching profession as a collaborative profession, and I think our task here for this panel is to dive a bit deeper into that and to look at really what does that mean at the individual level of the teacher. What does a teacher need to be equipped with in order to thrive in such a profession? And the title of our panel is The Anatomy of a Future-Ready Educator, and I think anatomy is the right word, because what I'd like to do is dissect a bit sort of what are the knowledge, what is the knowledge, what are the skills, what are the attitudes, what are the values that teachers really need to be ready for today's classroom, but also for classrooms in the next 10, 20 or 30 years. So, and this is, of course, a really important question for us at this forum, because the focus is on teacher education, and we need to know what exactly we are preparing our teachers for in our teacher education programs. So in other words, what should be the focus of our teacher education programs, and what should we as teacher educators, policymakers, researchers, etc., really put at the center of our work? So I hope that this panel, the conversation here, will set the conceptual foundations for the rest of the conversations during the workshops, during the following panels, by exploring how we can really navigate the complex challenges that teachers face and the qualities and characteristics that they need to have. So to discuss this, I'm really delighted to be joined here by a distinguished group of teacher educators. We have with us here Kay Livingston, Professor of Educational Research, Policy and Practice at the University of Glasgow, and a former long-standing editor of the European Journal of Teacher Education, as well as a long-standing expert advisor to the European Commission on Teacher Education. And Kay has also supported the work of European Schoolnet in the Continue Up project, which Marc mentioned. We also have with us here Jonna Kangas, who's Senior University Lecturer and Adjunct Professor at the University of Helsinki, who has supported the 21st Century European Teachers Project, the second Teacher Academy project that is part of this event here today, and brings over 15 years of research and practice experience in teacher education and teacher professional development. And then we also have with us Roberta Piazza, full Professor of General and Social Pedagogy at the University of Catania, and a leading European voice on lifelong learning and adult education. And finally, Silvia Panzavolta, Senior Researcher at INDIRE in Italy, who has been working for over 25 years on the intersection of educational research and school innovation, notably within the Italian Avanguardia Educativa movement. So, let's dive right into it. And the first question I'd like to ask all of you is, in one sentence, what do you think is the most important competence a teacher graduating today needs that maybe 30 years ago they did not need, or to a much lesser extent? And let's start with you, Silvia.
Is it working? Yeah. Okay, thank you for the question. One sentence is hard. But anyway, I think the world was completely different. So I think now the teachers need a different mindware, speaking about anatomy. And I think they need to know how to help support the students to navigate complexity and fragmentation without losing integrity, and having a twofold approach, one on the cognition, metacognition, and the other one on social emotional skills.
Great, thank you. Roberta.
Okay, if I have to answer in one sentence, I will say that the most important competence a teacher needs today is the capacity to continuously reinterpret and reframe their own professional practice in response to changing learners and context.
Excellent. Let's come to Jonna first before we come to Kay.
Good morning, everybody. Bonjour. Buenos dias, everybody. Nice to see you all here, and it's nice to connect with you too. So, as this kind of talks normally are, somebody's talking and everybody else are playing something warm game in the telephone. So maybe today we can also be a little collaborative here. So I would think the collaboration that Mr. Vargas already highlighted in his keynote is one of the key elements that we cannot learn from lecture, that somebody is giving a lecture about collaboration and you are writing your notes, you're typing your notes these days. But it's more important to really through the practices of pre-service teacher education towards of that idea of how we collaborate from the start, how we reflect together, how we share our professional, personal, metacognitive development. But what we need for that are the future teachers that are able to hope and dream the future, because we don't know what the future is. So we can't teach that through the screen or through our research that always look to the past, but give the skill of imagine the future they are delivering, I think is the most precious skill and the most hard to deliver.
Okay, thank you. So, metacognition, dealing with complexity, being able to reinvent themselves, having a vision for the future. Okay, anything that you can still add there?
Well, Marc began this morning talking about teachers as change makers, and I think 30 years ago, when many of the teachers graduated, there was an expectation that they taught the curriculum that had been agreed, and that was really the main task for them. But when we think about change makers, that's a different set of competences. It's a different starting point for teachers thinking of themselves as change makers. What does that require? How do they keep learning in order to do that? Marco talked about inspiration, and again, I think that is something that is at the heart of teaching, and we really must think about that at the forefront. I will say a lot more about some of the other competences, but I think that sense of a teacher as a change maker is really important for a good starting point for a change of mindset.
Okay, thank you. Can you expand a bit on that? I mean, what does that actually mean? And when we say we want to have teachers as change makers, what type of competencies do they need to be this future-ready educator that we have as a theme here for the panel?
Well, of course, and Marco gave us a long list of challenges for teachers, and we could start with digital literacies, because we know that teachers around Europe and beyond are concerned about that. How can they be inspirational around digital literacies when many of them themselves are very fearful of it? They worry about security, about privacy, and so on. And as we heard from Stefaan, that the sense of the professional development being offered for them is often about the technical aspects, when actually it is for them to do with, there are multiple knowledges, and they know that their students, their pupils are accessing. How do they have the competence to think about this huge access to knowledge, and where do teachers start? It's another huge aspect that's sitting on their shoulders. So if we break that down, we really begin to think about not just collecting different knowledges, but actually what's the thinking that lies? What are the thinking processes that lead people to those? And so for the teacher, it is about saying, why am I thinking what I believe? What is the truth? What is the reality? And how can I help my students to really understand the complexity of the thinking processes and make their thinking processes about what they access, and questioning it and having curiosity. So it's a very different set of competences that we're talking about now. And that would be the starting point. I think we heard a lot from our keynote speaker about collaboration. And again, I think at our peril, we talk about collaboration in abstract, because going around schools and seeing teachers across Europe in their classrooms, we have a huge strength. But how do we actually draw on that strength? And the collaboration, we talk about mentors. We've heard that as an opportunity and as an example this morning. But again, teachers need the competence to actually collaborate, not only the time. And again, mentors are often thought of as something for induction or for beginning teachers. And yet, throughout the whole profession, we actually need peer mentoring to be going on all of the time. So we're drawing on the strength that we've got in our classrooms. And mentoring is a skill in itself. It's a competence in itself. And what are we doing to enable? It's not enough to allocate a mentor to somebody and then think that that's the job done. We've done that bit. How do we actually engage, collaborate with one another in a meaningful way that leads to the kind of change that we heard Marco talk about? So building the competence of trust, relationships. Mentoring is a relationship, and if we can get that right between teachers, It expands who counts as a teacher educator, because within a school community and within the community itself, within the local community, the opportunities for us to be able to mentor and work together, it takes some of the huge burden of teachers, where again we talked about teachers working in isolation. They should no longer feel that. It's the competence to see it is about head and heart. Yes, cognitive skills, but again, we know burnout, mental health issues, to be able to see the school where it is about collaboration, it's about drawing on the different strengths, it's about gaining the competence to be able to engage with that, to learn from it, to learn from also the international exchanges, the relationships with ed tech providers, with health professionals, with libraries, museums, we could go on. So that sense of how do we collaborate, we actually need professional development that allows that to happen. Any competences that we would identify, just as you said, they will change. They have to be dynamic. And a project I was involved in that actually worked with 16 countries to identify a long list of competences that innovative teachers might need. What we saw at the forefront, these competences could be the same: creative, curious, problem solver, risk taker, so on. But the dynamic of how they worked together was what mattered. And at the end of the day, to be that change maker that Marco talked about, it needs agency. And by that, it is the capacity for teachers to act, to be the inspiration, and to do that. And again, how often in professional development do you see something about helping teachers to develop agency, to act? And for me, that's a huge competence we have to work on.
That's already a very tall order we set out here at the beginning, and I think we'll come back, hopefully at the end, to explore, is this actually realistic, what we're talking about here in trying to achieve with the teachers. Jonna, can I come back to you now? Finnish teacher education has in the past sometimes been held up as a sort of gold standard of teacher education. So I'm curious, how are you currently as a teacher educator addressing some of these competencies that Kay has addressed, that the other colleagues have addressed? Can you give us some examples?
Thank you for the question. And I think that when we said that the Finnish teacher education has been one of the best, it's also that we are always very to change our system. We know that something is working today is old-fashioned by tomorrow. And the whole process going in Finland, that we are, for example, facing the lack of teachers. Even in Finland, we have a lack of teachers. Young people don't want anymore to be teachers for the reasons were just mentioned in the keynotes. So we solved the problem. We started to train the school assistants who are not anymore young people. I think they are young people in their 50s, females who have not ever have opportunities to go to the university, to study, to take the study loan. Their family wouldn't allow that. They didn't have the economical status to do that. So now when they have been already working 20 years into the schools, into the early childhood education center, now they are ready. They have grown their own children. They know the field. They don't have any retention. The 100% of our students, they graduate on time, they go there, they communicate with us, they continue the collaboration with university. And we are like, whoa, why nobody never talked of these persons before? But it's not about how we train them. The whole teacher education have been changed totally. They have only very limited hours to study. So we don't waste their time for boring frontal lectures. They can listen those in videos and learn from them. Like we have put the whole program in the blended form. When they come, we have built research-based models. It's called reflective pair. Everything that happens in the classroom, with those few hours we have time with them in real life face-to-face situation, we have transferred the whole system in 6 years of time. We have made research, evaluate, ask international partners to see that are we really doing right thing here, what should again be changing. The whole program is now built on the resilience, how we grow the agency of these mostly females in their 50s who have always feel that we are not important. The men who make the policy are the important, or the rectors who are so wise, they are important. We have to switch their mindset in that program. Everything that is not what the teacher have to teach biology. You don't have to know how to teach biology anymore. The AI can make that for you. It can make the biology class in the future. Countries around Europe, India, China, they are already doing that. And in UNESCO processes where I am involved, we are following that process. It's coming to Europe too. But you have to know what is the key meta competence inside of your agency to lead the students, to be the example of lifelong learner. And boldly say that I don't know the answer. Why if we start to find it together? And I think these are the keys of changing the whole teacher education from knowledge delivery process of, well, boring lectures. Even I can give a boring lecture when I'm behind of that thing there. But is there any more point for that today, is the question.
Thank you, Jonna. Let's look at the angle of innovation and teachers as change makers a bit more. And Silvia, you're part of the Educator initiative, which is a long-standing movement focusing on innovation in schools. So you've worked with a lot of teachers as part of that initiative. And I'm curious to understand a bit, what are the characteristics or competencies that the teachers in those schools that manage to implement the innovation that's part of this initiative have? What distinguishes them from the rest?
Yeah, our experience is drawn on observing what schools are doing and how they deal with innovation. And we have been working together with schools in order to understand what innovation is or might be defined as. And innovation is more an attitude or a mindset rather than I'm done with innovation or a state of the art. And where innovation is implemented successfully, we can notice that the school has a whole school approach, that there's a dialogue among professionals, and the characteristics of the teacher is that I think I would say on one hand they are very flexible, open-minded, meaning that they're humble and they are eager to listen and to work from others, with the students as well, as Jonna was saying. And on the other hand, they feel they are kind of researchers. They are never done with the answers. There are always new challenges, new stuff. And another part is not only collaboration. Collaboration, of course, is the key. But first of all, communicating, because collaboration is more structured than communication. So first you start by communicating, sharing, at least sharing practices, knowledge, and trying to dialogue and to reflect on the practice. This metacognition on the one own's practice is very important, and to understand what works, for whom, and under which condition. I think this contextual-based reflection is very important.
And do you have any specific strategies within the initiative to develop those capacities?
Within Avanguardia Educativa, we have been, for example, working together with Harvard, with the Harvard Graduate School of Education, and there's a very nice, protocol or I would say approach, which is making learning visible, and this has helped us a lot to build a professional network made up of researchers and teachers documenting the practices and discussing the practices. So really noticing what is working, what are the evidence, I don't say the gold evidence, but the silver evidence of what is working and what is not working and what the voices of students are. So these are frameworks and protocols that I think work, and we have seen a shift in a paradigm in the organizational, not only individual, but also organizational level by using this kind of structures of protocols, frameworks.
Great, many thanks. Roberta, we've heard a lot about lifelong learning. What do we actually mean by that if a teacher is a lifelong learner, and how can we foster that competence or that capacity in teachers?
Thank you for your question. Yes, when we say that teachers should be lifelong learners, We often refer implicitly or explicitly to continuous participation in professional development, courses, workshops, training activities. But however, the evidence suggests that this understanding is too narrow. OECD data, already mentioned this morning, show that participation in professional training is now almost universal among teachers. Yet only a portion of these activities is perceived as having a significant impact on teacher practice. This indicates a fundamental issue. Lifelong learning cannot be reduced to an accumulation of training activities. Rather, it becomes necessary because teaching self is no longer a stable practice that can be maintained through repetition, but a continuously evolving activity that requires ongoing reinterpretations. A more robust interpretation is to see lifelong learning as a meta professional disposition grounded in reflective practice, not an individual process only, but deeply relational and situated within professional communities, sustained through feedback, dialogue, and collaborative forms of learning. Managing one's own professional learning is not about choosing the right courses, but about engaging in processes such as analyzing one's practice, collaborating with colleagues, already mentioned a lot of time this morning, contributing to shared projects. In other words, it's about becoming an active subject of one's own professional trajectory to a continuous process of identify construction. From this perspective, professional learning is inseparable from identity work because teachers are not only updating what they know, but continuously redefining what it means to teach well under changing conditions. At the same time, there is a tension that should not be overlooked. And this is a tension I think runs through our entire discussion today. Teachers are expected to enact this meta-professional disposition, yet the organizational condition of their work often limit their ability to do so. This disposition cannot be understood as an individual responsibility alone, but as a process that aligns on three things: personal engagement, collaborative cultures, and institutional conditions that actually enable learning.
Thank you, Roberta. Yes, you want to comment?
Sure, it's just one comment that we have learned in our EU 21st Century Teacher project during these 3 years is that when the teachers graduate, they think they are ready. And they kind of possess the kind of, I'm the ready teacher, I know everything. And in the process of co-teaching, we tried throughout this process, it was like teachers were saying that it's wonderful that I don't have to be the only expert here. They accept the teacher students to come take classes. They even say to the children that I don't know what's coming out of this, but let's give a try. So one thing in teacher profession, we always have to be alone. We have in the fortress, and we are fencing ourselves that the community or the social items or parents don't come that you're a bad teacher, you don't know enough. And we learned that if we change that, it can kind of, we don't know what's going to happen. We are doing something new in the school with the students. And the teacher were even kind of relaxing that, hey, I don't have to be the expert. And that gives them the little push to, hey, I can be also a learner. I don't have to be fixed and perfect quite yet.
Thank you, Jonna.
It's interesting because in the 21st Century Project, we had the opportunity to be in dialogue with some of the teachers, and the two biggest obstacles they raised in relation to this sense of lifelong learning was, as one would expect, time was one, and high stakes tests were the other. But what we've got to really think about is, let's have a pushback in terms of what is it about time that is stopping other things happening. Because if we're simply saying, oh, well, we need to find time, they're never going to get over the fact that they're missing time to be able to do these things, and they have to pay attention to the test. They care about the students. We heard this morning we've heard from Talis, that they care about their students. They enjoy the act of teaching. So what is it that they are doing that is a barrier in terms of time? And being much more honest about where they can find time. And that does need support from policymakers, from school leaders and so on. And some schools manage it well and others don't. And again, we have to have these conversations. I think the other thing that is a big obstacle is being stuck in a very traditional view of what it means to be a teacher, and seeing that a teacher's role is not only about teaching. I think perhaps having a change in term to an educator that is part of co-educating, whether it's with their own students, whether it's with those from outside of school. So thinking more broadly about the actual definition. But I would say the biggest obstacle is not realizing that now we must think about change as a constant. How many times over the years have I heard teachers saying, I wish we had a period of stability? That's not going to happen. We know that the complexity is almost in a state of what a colleague and I call dislocated complexity. Going back to the equilibrium that we search for in complexity theory is less and less as we see in school. And so we have to accept the biggest obstacle is not changing the way we think about teachers and teaching within teacher education.
Thanks, Kay. And speaking of complexity, I mean, we have a technology that is already in classrooms right now with AI that is massively increasing the complexity, raising important questions around teachers' professional identity, etc. So, Jonna, let me come back to you. Is AI changing what it means to be a teacher? And from your experience of working, and what knowledge, skills, and attitudes do teachers need to deal with that?
Now you opened the Pandora box. I think we have the challenge in all the countries where we have a lack of teachers. So municipalities, communes need to hire people who are unqualified. What does an unqualified teacher say? They don't go to the colleague and say that help me and mentor me. They go to the AI and say that plan me a biology class or give me an English lesson class. And they already using that, the students use that a lot. It's kind of easy to make a device, a tool, an app to think for yourself. So the question is pretty much about, is that the quality of education we want for the future, for our children, for the future society? Because then the question, of course, comes that do we need a teacher if that's only passing information, what's very scripted? And in fact, we have had this problem 10 years before because we have teacher manuals. And in many countries, you are expected to follow the teacher manual. I think it's as bad as having an AI to kind of a little bit consider what's the newest research there. But what the teachers would need as a competence is the kind of the reflection skill to kind of reflect that, okay, this is the goal of curriculum. First of all, is the curriculum right? Should I criticize the goal in the curriculum? Is the curriculum for being better humans, being future citizens, or is it only for companies to have a lot of people who can work in STEM? It can be the goal, but having a opportunity to reflect that. And being critical towards your own teaching. If you're copying your classes from decades, are you now the AI also using the kind of old, not considering who are my students today, what kind of maybe challenges they have, what are their strengths, how can I build this class differently because the children of this year are different than from last year. And this kind of adaptability, checking the whole picture to who am I, and the question is, what am I teaching? Is the teaching only delivering the information, pieces of facts? Or is the teaching, in fact, that part can come from a book, or we can look a video, or we can even put the AI nowadays to talk, having the video animation of our face to, there is the biology class coming. Then we stop, and then we start teaching what we do with this information. Is this sustainable information? Is this ethical information? What a human being could do with this piece of information. And that skill, having the young people, young teacher, whether they are already in service teacher or in still pre-terms, to kind of change the view of what's happening in the moment of teaching. And I'm happy that teacher students use AI. We have a lot of non-Finnish speaker teacher students. And if they struggle with, I couldn't make a permanent sentence in Finnish, and maybe you all know that it's a bit hard language to learn, not quite, but a little bit. So then they are focusing on the wrong thing. Put that text in AI, correct your mistakes. I mean, a Word can do that, but nowadays they put it somewhere else. Don't pay too much attention to that because some else technical tool can make it. Pay attention to the students. How you observe them, how you scaffold them, how you support them, how you maybe say that, let's not go that direction quite yet, we are following that thing on next day. And that game, that played there in the classroom would be one of the key competences. Are you the game master? Or are you just thrown out by the book of curriculum or school? Company made it and sell it to your rector with some extra nice things for the rector, never for the teacher. Be the master of the game.
May I add something to what Jonna is saying? So, in a sentence, just to add to what already said, the problem is not how many competencies I can acquire, but how can reinterpret my own learning considering changing context. Because we are talking about pedagogical, about relation between students and teachers, and not how competent I am in using AI.
Thanks, Roberta. Silvia, can we also hear from you? Because you're working with a lot of teachers across Italy, and I'm curious, do you really get the impression that there's a change in the sense of professional identity that teachers experience?
Yeah, I think it's changing. At least it's struggling. the relationship, what the representation also, was touching on this. What is the representation I have of myself as a teacher? So now that delivery of content is rapid, is almost well presented and so on, what's my role? So I think from an individual point of view, teachers are really reshaping their role. But I think that the schools at organizational level, they're struggling understanding what role they have to play in educating. They are not using, in fact, AI in classes, but students are using AI at home, in homework. And everybody knows they are more experts than many others in using apps and so on. So the fact is, I think, not only an individual stance, not only an individual uptake from the teachers, but from the organizational point of view. How the curriculum has to change, what is the professional dialogue we have to have and to support among the teachers, and what is our role. That has to be a shared vision, a shared dialogue, a shared communication among the school.
Thank you, and that's where the collaboration comes in again, of course.
Again.
Great, I've just been warned by Tommaso that we're running a little bit out of time, so, but I still want to pick up on a very important point that we haven't addressed on, and we talk about AI a lot at the moment, and probably not enough time on diversity in our classrooms. So, Roberta, I'm curious to hear your perspective on this, because you've done some work on this. What competencies does a teacher need to work with this increasingly diverse student body that we're facing, not just in regards to cultural backgrounds, but in regards to pedagogical needs, etc.?
So we are all witnessing the increasing diversity of our classroom in terms of that could be framed in terms of competencies that teachers should add to their competence already have. Intercultural skills, inclusive strategies, different way of instruction. But why all these competencies are important? There is a risk that we are witnessing at the moment, because diversity today is not only a matter of cultural linguistic differences. It concerns students' relationship with knowledge, their motivations, their expectations, and their ways of engaging with learning. In this sense, diversity is not a characteristic of some students. It's a structural condition of contemporary classrooms. Research we made on so-called unteachable students illustrate this point clearly. These students are not disengaged from learning per se. They often show high levels of engagement in contests they perceive as meaningful. What they resist is not learning itself, but form of schooling they experience as irrelevant or disconnected from their lives. This suggests that the challenge for teachers is not only to include different students, but to design learning environments that are meaningful across differences, and increasingly co-constructed with students themselves, recognizing them as active agents in defining problems, questions, and learning pathways. From this perspective, the key competencies are not simply additive. They involve a reconfiguration of teaching itself, from transmission to design, from control to negotiation, from standardization to responsiveness. Again, there is alignment with broader evidence. Data from OECD tell us something like that. While participation in training related to inclusion and diversity has increased in the last years, teachers continue to report significant need in these areas. And this suggests that the issue is not the absence of training, but the difficulty of translating it into practice within existing institutional frameworks.
Great, thank you. And I want to come back now to a point that I briefly touched upon earlier, and I think it's an important question in light of everything we've heard in the keynote, in the introduction speeches, and also in this panel here today. And this is, are we actually setting us up for failure? Or as teacher educators, is it even realistic to prepare teachers for this role that we've been describing here? Yeah, your thoughts on that? Okay, let's start with it.
Teachers have had to have broad shoulders for a long time, and in all the years I've been involved in teacher education and all the articles that are sent to the journal, it is always another expertise that's needed, another aspect that's added to their already heavy workload. So they can't keep taking on more and more. And I think, again, teacher education needs, from day one with students in initial teacher education, to put across this sense of you're not working in isolation in 21st century schools. It is about working in collaboration. And the sense of always a supportive environment being there requires not only the political will to enable that to happen, school leaders, the sense of how can teacher educators working with schools so that we can have a much better sense of you are not alone in the classroom, you are not working in isolation, problem solving, being able to share some of the tasks, being able to feel that there is always someone to turn to in order to have that development of multiple pedagogical opportunities. And I think the other thing in teacher education is understanding if we have expectations that teachers will really think about the diversity of needs of the learners that are in the classroom, we in teacher education need to understand teachers have diverse learning needs as well. They don't come to us all the same and they learn in different ways. So again, it's not mass lectures, it's finding a much better understanding of the needs of the students that come to us and continuing that sense of ever evolving as a learner right from the day they join up as a student teacher, and sending the message that this will be a continuum where you'll continue learning in an environment that is supportive. And that environment for the conditions that support teachers throughout their career, again, needs to be made much, much clearer so they know from the start that there's going to be opportunities for them to learn. They have to evolve, but they're there, they're supported, and that time that is actually carved out for them. Because at the moment, it's not clear that they're going to have these opportunities.
Thanks, Kay. Jonna.
Yes, thank you. So is it realistic to train teachers for all of these demands? I would say that we need much more collaboration with policymakers. When UNESCO is pushing new recommendations for teachers, it's our role as a teacher education to say that where are the resources? When government is writing new policy papers about what should happening in the school and what are the new future of the education, we have to say that, hey, where are the resources? A couple of years ago, me and Professor Heidi Harju-Lukkanen, you will be listening today afternoon as a second keynoter, we made a huge research about the policy papers. What are their expectations to teachers? And the overall finding was that teachers are expected to be more of everything. They have to be more parents, more social workers, more doctors, more psychologists. And in every EU country, governments are cutting funds from education. Why? Because most of us are females and quite young of those. So it's easy to cut money from there. So how we turn this cycle to the other way around, how we invest all of that comes in to the education, the future generations, is it a big question. Should we start to train the teachers to be active in politics? Push them to become, or if all the MEPs would be teacher background, I think our EU would be different to look like. So how are we making the influence? But it's not possible that the teachers can be more of everything. Even the teacher education is much more efficient than it was 20 years ago. At least there's less money in it if you look at the countries of EU. But we're still producing good teachers, but it cannot go eventually that it's always less and less and less. Those countries EU is now fighting with of the knowledge and the competencies of the citizens. They are developing education high. Singapore, Hong Kong, whole India are kind of putting effort and resources, research, but also development in there. And in EU we have kind of stack where we were 50s, 60s, 70s, when we built the perfect teacher education system. So what to do with that is something that I think we have to solve this together.
Thanks. Very clear message to the policymakers in the room. Very quick reactions still from Roberta and Silvia.
Okay, so are we asking too much of teachers? Yes, it's easy to say yes. We are asking too much because expectations placed on teachers are expanded. They had to teach content, to support students' personal development, to foster critical thinking, manage diversity, integrate technology, update their practice. But however, maybe this answer alone risks oversimplifying the issue, because the problem is not simply the quantity of expectations, but their coherence and the conditions under which they are to be fulfilled. Teachers are asked to operate within a transformed educational paradigm, one that emphasizes agency, collaboration, adaptability, while still working within organizational structure that often reflect a more traditional industrial model of schooling. And the risk, is the construction of an ideal teacher that is conceptually appealing, but unattainable from a practical point of view. A more productive way to reframe the question should be, the issue is not whether we are asking too much of teachers, but whether our system are doing enough to make these expectations sustainable. This shifts the focus from individual responsibility to systemic conditions, how time is organized, how professional learning is embedded in daily work, how teachers are involved not only as implementers of reforms, but as co-designers of educational practices and policies. So rather than continuously adding new competencies, the challenge is to give coherence and meaning to the competence teachers already possess, and to create environments that allow these competencies to be enacted and developed over time within a professional culture based on trust, autonomy, and shared responsibility.
Thanks. And final word to you, Silvia.
Yeah, just a very quick closing. I think that if we imagine teacher as a superhero, we are, I think, going to fail. But of course, the teachers should know about some psychological knowledge, but they should work together with psychologists. They should know about social and economical condition, but they should co-work together with social workers. So the problem is shifting from this isolation, isolated status to interprofessionalism, cross-professionalism and being part of a team. This is the future. Otherwise, if we are adding expectations on teachers, they're going to retire, they're going to leave the profession as they are already doing.
Excellent, thank you. And that brings us also very nicely back to Carlos's keynote in regards to collaboration being really the core essence of where we need to get the teaching profession to. So many thanks to you, the panelists, for that inspiring discussion. And I think it really sets us up well for the workshops now, where a lot of the themes, lifelong learning, reflection, technology, will be picked up in further exchanges. So thanks to you.
Thank you.
With me here on stage, and thank you very much for your brilliant contribution. Can we move to the next slide, please? Thank you. So the parallel workshop will follow the coffee break. So you will have the chance to grab a coffee now, rest a bit, stretch your legs just outside here. Let's take about 20 minutes for the coffee break. Then you would need to find your hands-on workshop session. It's indicated in your badge where you should go. Just the first group would stay in this room in the ballroom. The other 3 groups would move from the exit here on the left to the 3 rooms that are waiting for you just after the little garden here. So please try to be timely and be there at 10 to 12 for the workshop to start, and enjoy the coffee break for now.